With this ruling, we can finally break ground on the new community market.
My name is Emma Collins, and this is the story of how a $5 lottery ticket destroyed my marriage and then saved my life. For 10 years, I believed in us. Michael and I weren't rich, far from it. We lived in a cramped two-bedroom rental on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, where the walls were thin enough to hear our neighbors arguing, and the heating only worked when it felt like it. He sold cars at a dealership downtown, and I spent my days scanning groceries at Save Mart, watching other people buy the life I dreamed about. Money was always tight. Some months, tight felt like an understatement. We'd sit at our kitchen table with bills spread out like a losing poker hand, trying to figure out which ones we could delay another week. But we had our rituals, our small pockets of joy that made the struggle feel worth. Its Sunday mornings meant burnt pancakes. Michael could never get the heat right, and lukewarm coffee because our ancient coffee maker had given up trying years ago. Friday nights meant curling up on our sagging couch under the same threadbare blanket we'd had since our wedding, watching reruns of shows we'd seen a dozen times, laughing at jokes we'd memorized. Michael would look at me across that couch, his eyes still holding traces of the young man I'd fallen for, and he'd say, "One day, one day life's going to turn around for us, and God help me, I believed him." Every single time. That October evening started like any other exhausting Thursday. My feet ached from a 9-hour shift, my lower back throbbed, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and collapse. But we were out of milk and bread, the essentials that couldn't wait until tomorrow, so I stopped at the corner store on Maple Street. The cashier was old Mr. Chen, a cheerful man with kind eyes who'd been running that store longer than I'd been alive. He had a way of making even the most mundane transaction feel personal, like you mattered in his small corner of the world. "Feeling lucky tonight, Mrs. Collins?" he asked with a teasing grin, gesturing to the new lottery display they'd set up by the register. The Powerball jackpot had climbed to $500 million, a number so absurd it didn't even feel real. I laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "At this point, Mr. Chen, I'll take divine intervention." The words came out half joking, but there was a thread of desperation woven through them. How many times had I prayed for a breakthrough? How many nights had I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was? I pulled out a crumpled $5 bill from my wallet, money I'd been saving for lunch tomorrow, and bought a single ticket. Just one. The paper felt flimsy in my fingers, inconsequential. I took a selfie in front of the store, one of those random pictures you take without thinking, the store's neon sign glowing behind me in the October dusk. When I got home, Michael was in the driveway, washing his car with an intensity that seemed excessive for our beat-up Honda. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment, everything felt almost beautiful. "Look what I got," I said, waving the lottery ticket at him playfully. "Maybe this is how God plans to bless us." He looked up, soap suds dripping from the sponge in his hand, and rolled his eyes with that crooked smile I'd once found so charming. "Right, Emma, and maybe pigs will fly over the house tonight." I tossed the ticket onto his dashboard, carelessly, thoughtlessly, and headed inside to make dinner with our meager groceries. I didn't think about that ticket again. How could I have known that small slip of paper, forgotten and smudged with my thumbprint, was about to rewrite our entire existence? The next few weeks felt different, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Michael started changing in subtle ways that I tried to ignore. He dressed sharper, suddenly caring about cologne and hair gel when he'd always been a jeans and t-shirt kind of man. His phone became a constant companion, always in his hand, always lighting up with messages that made him smile, secret smiles that never reached me. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked one evening, trying to keep my voice light, non-accusatory. "Just work stuff," he'd say, turning the screen away. "You know how demanding they can be." But I knew. Women always know. We feel the shift before we see the evidence. Marriage, I told myself, needed trust like lungs needed air. So I swallowed my suspicions and tried to breathe through the growing distance between us. He started working later, coming home at 9, then 10, then midnight. When I'd ask about his day, his answers became shorter, more evasive. The man who used to tell me everything was suddenly a stranger sharing my bed, and the loneliness of that realization was crushing. One Friday morning, 3 weeks after I'd bought that ticket, Michael left early. "Paperwork at the dealership," he said, kissing my forehead in a way that felt more like goodbye than see you later. I should have known something was wrong. I should have felt it in my bones. But I went to work like always, scanning endless groceries, smiling at customers, pretending my marriage wasn't crumbling like old bread. That night, the news played on the small TV in our living room while I folded laundry. The anchor's voice cut through my thoughts. "Oregon man claims $500 million Powerball jackpot. The winner, who wishes to remain anonymous for now, purchased the ticket at a convenience store in Portland." My heart stopped, then raced, then stopped again. I turned toward the hallway where Michael stood, frozen, his face pale in the blue glow of the television. Our eyes met, and in that split second, I saw everything: the guilt, the greed, the betrayal. It flickered across his features before he could mask it. "Wouldn't that be funny?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If it was you?" He forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow, mechanical. "Yeah, right. Like I'd be that lucky." That night, he didn't come to bed. I woke at 2 in the morning to find his side cold and empty. His phone, his wallet, his jacket, all gone. I told myself he'd gone for a drive to clear his head, that he'd be back by morning with some reasonable explanation. But morning came and brought with it the death of my marriage. He appeared at noon, wearing a suit I'd never seen before, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than our monthly rent, and an expression of cold determination that made my blood run icy. "We need to talk, Emma." Those 4 words. Those 4 simple words that signal the end of everything you've built. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd struggled through bills and celebrated small victories, and watched my husband transform into someone I didn't recognize. "I think we've outgrown each other," he said, his voice flat, rehearsed. "You hold me back. I can't keep living this small life with you." The words hit like physical blows. "What are you talking about? We've built everything together. 10 years, Michael. 10 years of us fighting for this life." He stood, pacing like a caged animal searching for justification. "You don't understand. I want more. I deserve better things, better people." "Better people?" My voice broke. "You mean Sabrina?" The name hung in the air between us. Sabrina, the sales rep at his dealership with the perfect hair and calculated laugh. I'd seen her once at a company picnic. The way she'd touched his arm, lingered too close, looked at him like he was already hers. He didn't deny it. That silence was worse than any confession. "She understands ambition," he said. "She makes me feel alive." I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face. "You won the lottery, didn't you?" His eyes narrowed. "What makes you think that?" "Because you're not the same man I married." "You're acting like someone who just bought himself a new soul," he laughed, bitter, cruel. "You're delusional, Emma. You've always been dramatic." Then he walked out. Just like that. 10 years ended with the sound of a closing door. 3 days later, I came home from work to find my entire life packed into boxes on the porch. A note sat on top, written in his handwriting but signed by a stranger. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll be fine." He'd changed the locks on the house we'd rented together, that he'd somehow bought outright overnight with money that wasn't his. I stood there in the October cold, staring at those boxes, at the home I'd been erased from, and felt something inside me shatter so completely I wasn't sure I'd ever find all the pieces. For weeks, I lived on my best friend Sarah's couch, moving through life like a ghost. Every night, I'd torture myself scrolling through social media until I found them. Michael and Sabrina, draped in designer clothes, toasting champagne in front of a mansion I could never have imagined affording. The caption under one photo said, "New beginnings." Forever grateful, I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream until the sky split open. But mostly, I just felt empty, scooped out, left to dry in the sun like something discarded and forgotten. My mother used to say, Betrayal doesn't start with a knife. It starts with a whisper. She was right. It started with the whisper of greed, with a secret Michael told himself he deserved, with a future he decided didn't include me. People say money changes everything. What they never say is how it exposes who you really are. Michael had always dreamed of being more. I just never realized that more meant without me. Chapter 2. The receipt that changed everything back. The apartment above the laundromat became my entire world. It was small, barely bigger than our old bedroom, with walls so thin I could hear Mrs. Patterson's television through the floor and the constant hum of washing machines that never quite stopped. Even at 3 in the morning, but it was mine. No one could change these locks. No one could throw me out. And in those early months, that was enough. Every morning, I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing words I didn't believe. "You'll be okay. You're stronger than this. You will survive." The woman staring back at me had dark circles under her eyes and a sadness that seemed to have settled into her bones. But she showed up to work every day. She put one foot in front of the other. She kept breathing. Michael's face was everywhere. Magazine covers, news articles, television interviews. "Local man wins $500 million jackpot," the headlines screamed. He stood beside Sabrina in every photo, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness that only new money can buy, bright, shiny, and ultimately hollow. I tried not to look. I really did. But it's impossible to avoid someone who's suddenly become a local celebrity, whose success story is being celebrated in the same city where he destroyed you. The grocery store where I worked became a minefield. Customers would recognize me, their eyes widening with pity or curiosity or that awful combination of both. "Isn't that Michael Collins' ex-wife?" they'd whisper, not quite quietly enough. Poor thing. "Can you imagine?" Yes, I wanted to scream. I can imagine. I'm living it every single day. 6 months after he left, on a rainy evening that matched my mood, I decided to clean my apartment. Maybe I was trying to create order in a life that felt chaotic, or maybe I just needed to keep my hands busy so I wouldn't reach for my phone to check on him again. A habit I hadn't managed to break. I pulled out an old handbag from the back of my closet, one I hadn't touched since before everything fell apart. It smelled faintly of old perfume and memories. Inside were the usual forgotten things: crumpled receipts, loose change, a dried-out pen, a broken hair tie, and then I saw it. A thin slip of paper slightly torn at one corner. A receipt from the corner store on Maple Street, dated October 17th, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. My credit card number was partially visible at the bottom. My hands started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was holding. This was the receipt from the lottery ticket. The lottery ticket I'd bought. The one I'd tossed onto Michael's dashboard and never thought about again. The one he'd claimed as his own. I sank to the floor, the receipt clutched in my trembling fingers, and something inside me shifted. The grief that had weighed me down for months began transforming into something else. Something sharper, clearer, more purposeful. Could it be? I whispered to my empty apartment. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at that receipt under the harsh fluorescent light, running through every detail of that October evening. I remembered Mr. Chen's kind smile, the selfie I'd taken outside the store, the casual way I'd tossed the ticket into Michael's car. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. The lottery office opened at 9. I was there at 8:30, sitting in my car, rehearsing what I would say. My hands were still shaking when I finally walked through the doors. "Hi," I said to the woman behind the counter, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think there's been a mistake with a winning ticket." The woman, her name tag read Patricia, smiled professionally. "What kind of mistake, ma'am?" "The $500 million winner. I believe I purchased that ticket, not my husband." Patricia's smile faltered. She glanced at her colleague, then back at me. "That's a serious claim, ma'am. Do you have any proof?" I slid the receipt across the counter. "I have this. And the store should have CCTV footage from that day." What happened next felt like it was happening to someone else. Phone calls were made. Managers appeared. I was moved to a private office where officials in suits asked me questions while typing rapidly on computers. The room was too cold and smelled like stale coffee, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stay calm. "Mrs. Collins," one of them finally said, his expression grave. "We've pulled the surveillance footage from the store. A woman matching your description did purchase a lottery ticket on October 17th at 6:47 p.m. The timestamp matches the winning ticket exactly." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. "Are you saying—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "We're saying you have a legitimate claim to investigate. We'll need to verify everything, but if what you're telling us is accurate, then the ticket was fraudulently claimed." I walked out of that office in a daze. The October sun was too bright, the sounds of traffic too loud. I made it to my car before the tears came. Not tears of sadness this time, but of something fiercer. Validation, hope, a burning, righteous anger that I'd been trying to suppress for months. He stole from me. My own husband stole my future and left me with nothing. The next week was a blur of gathering evidence. I went back to the corner store where Mr. Chen immediately recognized me. "The blessing lady," he exclaimed. "I remember you. You came in that evening, bought milk, bread, and one lottery ticket. You made a joke about God remembering you." He signed a statement. The store's owner provided the CCTV footage without hesitation. I found the selfie on my phone, the one I'd taken outside the store that evening, with the date and time embedded in the metadata and the store's neon sign clearly visible in the background. Every piece of evidence fit together perfectly, like a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. I found a lawyer, David Turner, one of the best in Portland. He listened to my story in his downtown office, his expression growing more intense with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and said, "Mrs. Collins, you have one hell of a case, and I intend to make sure you win it." For the first time in 6 months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Power. The power that comes from knowing the truth and having the evidence to prove it. We filed the lawsuit on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, it had exploded across every news outlet in Oregon. "Woman claims $500 million lottery prize was stolen by husband," the headlines screamed. My phone rang nonstop with reporters, old friends, distant relatives who suddenly remembered I existed. I turned off my phone. This wasn't about publicity or revenge. This was about justice, Michael called that Saturday. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Emma." His voice was tight, controlled. "What the hell are you doing?" "Taking back what's mine." He laughed, sharp, disbelieving. "You've lost your mind. You can't win this. Then I guess we'll see in court." There was a long pause. I could hear Sabrina's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. "You really think anyone will believe you?" he finally said. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "They don't need to believe me, Michael. They just need to see the evidence." The line went dead. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside my apartment, outside the courthouse, outside everywhere I went. David shielded me from most of it, but even he couldn't protect me from the court of public opinion. Some people supported me, other women who'd been betrayed, who saw their own stories in mine. But others were cruel. Gold digger. Bitter ex-wife. She's just jealous he moved on. I learned to tune it out. I'd already lost everything once. There was nothing left they could take from me. The day of the final hearing arrived like a storm that had been building for months. I wore a simple navy suit, modest, professional, nothing flashy. Sabrina arrived in designer silk, dripping in jewelry, playing her part perfectly. Michael stood beside her in an expensive gray suit, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. Judge Eleanor Brooks presided, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She read through the case details with an expression that gave nothing away. David presented our evidence methodically, piece by piece. The store receipt with my credit card information. The CCTV footage showing me purchasing the ticket, clear as day. The timestamp on my bank transaction, Mr. Chen's sworn statement. The selfie from my phone with embedded metadata proving I was at that exact location at that exact time. And finally, the lottery office records showing that Michael had claimed the ticket 2 days after I purchased it, listing himself as the sole buyer. The courtroom fell silent as the video played on the large screen. There I was, in my jeans and old jacket, tired from work, handing cash to Mr. Chen and collecting my change. And then 2 days later, there was Michael, dressed sharply, confident, walking into the lottery office with my ticket. I watched Sabrina's face change. The perfect smile cracked. She leaned toward Michael, whispering something harsh that I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Her eyes, which had always seemed so confident in those photos, now darted around the courtroom like a trapped animal looking for escape. "Mr. Collins," Judge Brooks said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "do you have any proof that you purchased this ticket?" Michael's lawyer stood, stammering through an objection that even he didn't seem to believe. "Your Honor, while the footage is compelling, it doesn't necessarily prove—" "It proves exactly what it needs to prove," David interrupted smoothly. "The claim form submitted by Mr. Collins lists him as the sole purchaser." "That's fraud, Your Honor. Clear and deliberate fraud." Judge Brooks nodded slowly. "I agree. Mr. Collins, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Michael stood, his face pale. "Your Honor, I found the ticket in my car. I thought it was mine. I didn't know—" "You knew." My voice surprised me, clear and strong in the quiet courtroom. "You knew it was mine, Michael. You knew, and you took it anyway." Judge Brooks looked at me, then back at Michael. "Mr. Collins, ignorance is not a defense when the evidence of deceit is this clear. The lottery ticket in question was purchased by Mrs. Emma Collins. You claimed it fraudulently, without her knowledge or consent." She paused, letting her words sink in. Effective immediately, all assets derived from the fraudulent claim of this lottery prize are to be transferred to Mrs. Emma Collins, the rightful winner. Mr. Collins, you are ordered to relinquish all related financial holdings within 30 days. Additionally, you will be investigated for fraud, and criminal charges may follow. The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. Reporters frantically typed on their phones. Cameras clicked. And Sabrina, beautiful, confident Sabrina, let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. "What?" She turned to Michael, her voice rising. "You told me you bought that ticket." "You told me—" She didn't finish. Instead, she grabbed her designer purse and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. The fairy tale was over, and she was done playing the princess. Michael remained frozen in his seat, his expensive lawyer trying to speak to him, but Michael seemed unable to hear anything. He looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside him and removed whatever had been keeping him upright. David placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it." I exhaled slowly, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like I might collapse from the weight of it finally lifting. "No," I whispered. Justice did. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like locusts. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved toward my face. Questions came from every direction. "Emma, how do you feel? What will you do with the money? Do you forgive your ex-husband?" I stopped at the bottom of the courthouse steps, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke from the deepest part of my heart. "I feel grateful. Grateful for the truth, grateful for justice, and grateful that I didn't lose myself in all of this. I'm not here to destroy anyone. I just wanted what was rightfully mine to be acknowledged." "Do you forgive him?" a reporter pressed. I paused, considering. Forgiveness is a process. Right now, I'm focused on rebuilding my life. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment above the laundromat, listening to the familiar hum of the machines below. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Please, Emma, can we talk?" "I'm sorry. I made a mistake." "Michael." I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me, the part that had loved him for 10 years, wanted to respond, wanted to hear what he had to say. But the stronger part, the part that had survived his betrayal and fought for justice, knew better. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. There were no more words needed between us. He had made his choices, and now he would live with the consequences. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in 8 months. The storm had finally passed, and I was still standing. 3 months after the verdict, I drove through Portland in a new car, not flashy, just reliable, and found myself on the same street where the old grocery store had stood. Save Mart was gone now, replaced by something new, something mine. The sign read Collins Community Market in bold, beautiful letters. Inside, the shelves were stocked with quality groceries at affordable prices. But more importantly, the staff was made up of women like me, single mothers, women recovering from financial ruin, widows who'd been abandoned, survivors of domestic abuse, women who needed a second chance, and a boss who understood what it meant to rebuild from ashes. My story had gone viral. People called me the quiet winner, and initially I'd felt uncomfortable with the attention. But I came to realize that my journey wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who'd ever been betrayed, every person who'd been told they couldn't rise again. I started the Second Chance Fund, a foundation that helped women restart their lives after financial abuse and betrayal. We provided job training, small business loans, safe housing, and legal assistance. Within 6 months, we'd helped 200 women. By the end of the first year, that number had tripled. The media followed Michael's downfall with the same intensity they'd followed his rise. Sabrina had drained their joint accounts before disappearing to Europe with a Swiss banker she'd apparently been seeing on the side. The mansion was sold to pay legal fees and back taxes. The luxury cars were repossessed. His so-called friends, the ones who'd appeared when the money did, vanished just as quickly. One December afternoon, I stopped at a downtown cafe for coffee. The air was cold, smelling of pine and snow, and Christmas lights twinkled in shop windows. I was waiting for my order when I saw someone across the street that made my heart stop. Michael. He was sitting on a bench near a bus stop, wearing clothes that had seen better days, his beard unkempt, his face gaunt. A paper cup sat at his feet with a few coins inside. For a moment, I thought I was seeing things. But then he looked up and our eyes met across the street. I should have walked away. I should have let him sit there with his consequences. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe the last thread of who I used to be, made me cross that street. Emma. His voice cracked when he said my name, like it hurt to speak. Is it really you? I nodded, pulling my coat tighter against the cold. It's me. He tried to smile, but it twisted into something broken. You look different. Good different. I should, I said quietly. I'm free. He looked down at his hands, hands that used to hold mine, hands that had signed away our marriage for greed. I've lost everything. I know. I was stupid, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought the money would make me happy. I thought it would fix everything. Money doesn't fix anything, Michael. It just amplifies who you already are. We stood there in the December cold. Two people who used to know everything about each other. Now, strangers sharing a moment of painful truth. I reached into my purse and pulled out $100 bill. His eyes widened. I don't want your pity, he muttered. It's not pity, I said, placing the money in his cup. It's closure. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Emma. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I paused, not turning around. The Christmas lights reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk, and somewhere nearby, a street musician was playing Silent Night. So am I, Michael, I said softly. So am I. That was the last time I saw him. A year after the verdict, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of faces looking up at me expectantly. I stood at that podium, looking out at all those women, and spoke from my heart. Someone once told me that betrayal breaks you, I said. And they were right. It does. But what they didn't tell me is that sometimes you need to break before you can rebuild yourself into something stronger. The audience was silent, listening. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that losing everything was a blessing in disguise. It wasn't. It was hell. It was the darkest period of my life. But what I learned in that darkness is that I was stronger than I ever knew. And so are you. The applause was thunderous, but in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the success or the recognition. I was thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who stood on a porch staring at boxes of her life, wondering how she would survive. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in resilience, in integrity, in the ability to rise after you've been knocked down. After the conference, I drove home through the city streets, watching Portland transform in the evening light. The radio was playing, and when Don't Stop Believing came on, I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. I hadn't stopped believing. Even when everything fell apart. Even when the man I loved betrayed me. Even when I had every reason to give up, I hadn't. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city. A cup of expensive coffee in my hands, I could afford the good stuff now, and thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. Michael had wanted more. He'd been so desperate for it that he'd sacrificed everything real for something hollow. And in the end, what did he gain? Nothing. Less than nothing. But me? I'd gained everything. Not the money, though I wouldn't pretend it didn't help. I'd gained myself. I'd gained the knowledge that I could survive anything. I'd gained a purpose bigger than my own pain. I'd gained freedom. The city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars. And somewhere out there, women I'd helped through the Second Chance Fund were tucking their children into bed in safe homes, or opening their own businesses, or simply sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. My mother's voice came back to me, as it often did. Betrayal doesn't start with a knife. It starts with a whisper. She was right. But what she didn't tell me is that survival doesn't start with a shout. It starts with a whisper, too. A whisper that says, I will not break. I will not give up. I will rise. And I had risen. As I headed inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring, I thought about the lessons I'd learned the hard way. Greed blinds faster than poverty ever could. When you betray love for wealth, you lose both. And in the end, patience and integrity always win. Not because the universe is fair, it's not, but because people who choose those values end up with something money can never buy, the ability to look at themselves in the mirror and be proud of what they see. And that, I'd learned, is the real jackpot.